DAO Watch Fireside, episode 4. In this episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Adam the Thriller Miller, who is the founder of MyDAO, or one of the co-founders of MyDAO, which is a Marshall Islands-based DAO consultancy, I guess you could say. It's a really, really great conversation. We discuss whether or not code actually is law, in his opinion, how he takes DAOs and makes them legal entities, and why he decides to take DAOs and make them legal entities, or help people to take DAOs and make them legal entities. It's a really, really, really fascinating hour's worth of chit chat. So I hope you enjoy it. It's DAO Watch Fireside, episode 4. Myself, Cryptosi, and Adam the Thriller Miller. Hello and welcome to DAO Watch episode 4. I am your host, Cryptosi, and I am joined finally by the man himself, Adam the Thriller Miller. Adam, how are you, sir?
GM, I'm good, thank you. Good to be here.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know who Adam is the co-founder or the founder of MyDAO, which is a Marshall Islands DAO incorporation specialist consultancy, could we say?
That's fair.
What they do is they help DAOs get set up as legal entities within the Marshall Islands. It's something that we've actually touched on previous episodes before, to varying degrees and with varying answers. And I have been super keen to get Adam onto the show just so that we could discuss the legal aspects of DAOs and also the friction between maybe the old school crypto people like myself who are like code is law and the reality of code possibly not being law and maybe law being law. So Adam, let's start with your background. Before you got to MIDAO, how did you find out about crypto and what was your first experience with DAOs?
Well, crypto started for me in 2012. I read an article, I think in the New York Times, about the Silk Road. And in particular, I heard that the Silk Road was on something called the Darknet. And I thought, wait a second, I've loved the internet since I was a little kid. I mean, obsessively have loved the internet my whole life. And to find out there's part of the internet that I had never heard of and I didn't know how to access was just shocking to me. And so pretty much for the next year or two, I spent all my free time digging into first the Darknet, the Silk Road. Through that, I found out about Bitcoin, had to figure out how to buy Bitcoin. There were no exchanges at the time, at least that I was aware of. You know, I had to send a Western Union to a guy in Australia and trust that 12 hours later, he was going to send me back the Bitcoin he promised to send. And frankly, that always worked fine. So that's how I got into crypto, broadly. But it wasn't until when Ethereum came out that I really saw the potential in crypto, you know, not just a global digital currency or asset, but a global shared computer that could do literally anything you can imagine. And what was most exciting about that to me was DAOs. And so it really came about because I had decided to leave my corporate job about 3 or 4 years ago. And I spent a year studying everything happening in crypto. I mean, from programming to media and everything in between. And so DAOs were one of the things that I came across as one of the things happening in crypto. And to me, they were the most exciting.
Your corporate job, if I'm prying too much, you can just say, leave me alone. But your corporate job, did it have anything to do with law? Was you a legal professional before you started up MIDAO?
No. So interestingly, I've always been a tech entrepreneur, really, since I was a kid. And my last job was doing tech intrapreneurship, you could say. I was on the emerging technology innovation team at Capital Group, which is a large global investment management firm. And while I was there, we were researching blockchain, crypto, ICOs, Bitcoin, all this stuff. But no, actually, the reason I got involved in this legal services business, MyDAO, is because I actually was starting a DAO tech company. And one of my clients is called Clipper Exchange or Admiral DAO. And we were offered $1 million grant from the Moonbeam Ecosystem Fund. And they said to accept this grant, you have to sign this grant agreement, which means you need a legal entity for your DAO. And so we looked around, and this was back in mid 2021. We looked at Delaware, we looked at Switzerland, Cayman, all these popular jurisdictions, and came to the realization that every single legal entity in the world had certain deficiencies from a Web3 perspective. And that's what initially caused us to look into, and I could, if you want, I could tell you the rest of the story. But
perfect. Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So
that's my next question is, why did you start me? What were the pain points that you were solving?
For sure. So, so we were a DAO, right? That wanted to be able to us, truly be a DAO in the crypto sense, which meant that members could be anonymous. It meant that we didn't want to have a management team. And those were the two key things that every legal entity in the world, until more modern legal entities like what we created in the Marshall Islands, required you to have a management team of some kind. You had to have a board or officers or trustees or managing members, et cetera. And every single legal entity required you to know the names and addresses of all of your members, the physical mailing addresses or residences. And it just kind of makes sense. I mean, before crypto, there was no other way to know who your members or owners or shareholders were. There literally was no other way. So of course you had to know the names and addresses of all your members. But thanks to tokens and crypto, you don't. So anyway, so that's what caused us to reach out to a jurisdiction that's been a leader in the shipping industry for many decades. And that's the Marshall Islands, which is a former US territory, now sovereign nation since the 70s in the South Pacific, about halfway between Hawaii and Australia. And knowing that they were a leader in the shipping industry, we reached out to a senator there and said, hey, in some ways, DAOs are kind of like ships, right? Like they kind of live everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And so how would you like to expand your country's expertise from shipping into DAOs and Web3? And so that's what started. We wrote our first law that passed in late 2021. We've now written 3 laws that have passed in the Marshall Islands, creating a nonprofit and for-profit DAO LLC, which is this legal entity that's made for DAOs and overcomes the couple of deficiencies and many others. And then we started a partnership with the government of the Marshall Islands called MyDAO. It stands for Marshall Islands DAO. And that partnership is the registered agent that can actually create and maintain these entities for people. So yes, I've written laws. I work with lawyers almost 24/7, but I'm not a lawyer. I've never been to law school. And it's been interesting being a tech entrepreneur working in the legal space.
Yeah. That's very, very interesting. You decided to go with the Marshall Islands. Were there any other jurisdictions that were close? What would you have said was the other two or three that were maybe you would have gone with had you not have been able to go in the Marshall Islands?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, the jurisdictions that we looked at were places like the Cayman Islands, which is very popular in the venture capital industry as an offshore jurisdiction, also somewhat popular in crypto, even though they don't have the DAO LLC. They have a foundation model that's very popular in crypto. We looked at Panama, which is another good prospect, also very popular in the shipping industry. They unfortunately are involved in some geopolitical risk. They're on some blacklists and stuff like that for potential terrorist funding. So that's one reason we didn't reach out there. But it is also another popular jurisdiction in certain industries. Places like Switzerland. And I think the biggest thing is that, you know, most of these jurisdictions, actually a lot of jurisdictions in the world have talked about doing DAO or Web3 related legislation, but they haven't done it. And I think it's a combination of just it being hard for democratic nations to pass new legislation with usually having something to lose. So the Cayman Islands is already so popular for so many different use cases. I think they see DAOs as a risk that's not worth taking. Same thing with Switzerland, right? When you're already one of the most popular places in the world for people to put their offshore assets and offshore companies, do you really want to take a risk by doing something new? And even if that new thing isn't that risky, I think there's a hesitation to even consider it. So those are some of the jurisdictions we looked at, but frankly, we never reached out to anyone other than the Marshall Islands because the first person we reached out to, Senator and now Minister Paul in the Marshall Islands, he actually been involved in some crypto projects in the past in the Marshall Islands and was so excited to do something innovative like this that we never looked back.
I guess it's a completely different landscape now to what it was back in even 2021, when if you said DAO, you were maybe talking about organizations with market caps of a few 100 million at the most. Whereas now we've got Arbitrum DAO. We've got some DAOs that are a few billion at the moment at the start of a bull run, maybe even 10 plus billion by the time we're finished here. do you think that this fast moving landscape will open up other jurisdictions to possibly taking the risk? Or do you think that now the Marshall Islands, having been the first ones there, because I think there was some talk about Delaware recently having some new laws for DAOs, and I know the EU have got something with MICA which kind of sort of addresses DAOs. But do you think that with this changing landscape that maybe people won't have to go as far afield as the Marshall Islands to set up?
You know, first of all, Wyoming just passed a new DAO related legislation in the last couple of weeks, which might be what you're thinking of. It's called a DUNA, which is a modified version of an UNA, which stood for Unincorporated Nonprofit Association. And now you have a decentralized unincorporated nonprofit association. You know, I think the real answer to this question is that really, truly every situation is different in terms of which jurisdiction is going to make the most sense for you, which legal entity type is going to make the most sense. You know, for example, and I'll differentiate the Wyoming, when Wyoming, by the way, also has a DAO LLC. So they have a DAO LLC and a DUNA now. The biggest difference between Wyoming and offshore tends to be like, do you want your legal entity to be in the United States or not? Right. And if your whole team is in the US and you're going to serve mostly customers in the US and your investors are in the US, frankly, you don't have much of a choice. You pretty much have to create your entity in the US, right? And we could go into that in more detail why. But if your project is global in nature, if you really have founders all over the world and customers, clients, users all over the world, investors all over the world, now you can choose between any country in the world. And no government is going to say, well, you know, because you had members in America and Africa and Europe and Asia, we wish you had come to Asia, right? It just doesn't make sense. You really do have that choice. And so that's kind of for a lot of people, that's the first question is just, do we want to be in the US or not? And frankly, I think a lot of people are afraid of basing their entity in the US. The other thing is, yeah, right. And by the way, a lot of projects have more than one entity. So, I mean, look at even the venture capital industry. So forget about crypto for a second. I've heard that something like 75% of American venture capital firms have a Cayman Islands entity in addition to a US entity, right? And often they have even more entities. And the same thing is true for crypto projects. There's a really common structure where you have like a Delaware LLC or a Delaware C Corp, which is like the LabCo or the OpCo or the DevCo, terms that maybe people have heard thrown around. And then you also have an offshore entity. Traditionally, it might have been in the Cayman Islands. Now maybe you're coming to the Marshall Islands, and you're actually using both of those entities in concert to meet all of your combined kind of legal entity needs. The other thing I'll say about the Wyoming DUNA, for example, is that a DUNA and a DAO LLC are very different. And I'd say the easiest way to differentiate between them, although there's a lot of nuance to it, is that a DAO LLC is for an organization, right? It's for a DAO that thinks of itself as an organization that manages a collective treasury, takes collective action, might want to open a bank account, might want to hire employees. In a lot of ways, it's like a traditional organization. A DUNA tends to be for a protocol that wants to be organization free, right? It's kind of like for a protocol that says, you know what, like we need to govern this protocol and we want to protect the people that are governing it from unlimited liability, but we don't need a bank account. We don't need insurance. We don't need employees. We're not trying to act like an organization. We just want to be a protocol that is governed and get some legal protections.
So would you say, I guess the difference would be a DUNA would be good for something like a Tornado Cash, whereas, or maybe not now that is sanctioned, whereas a DAO LLC will be good for something like a Uniswap. So one where they know they're going to be getting profits, they know they're going to be making money, they know they're going to be a bit more hands-on, and another one where it's just the software. Is that the pretty?
Yeah, I think that's, if you had to boil it down to one differentiator, that would probably be the right way to do it. I will also say there's increasingly people are using multiple entities, and so you might want to have a DUNA and a DAO LLC and a Delaware C Corp. Right. Well, yeah. And by the way, like it might sound sketchy, but people have been doing this in the corporate world for decades. It's not a new thing to say we might want 2 or 3 entities. Now, if you look at like FTX, they had 135 entities. That's sketchy. Like if your lawyer tells you need 100 entities for your project, you probably should start asking some questions. But if they say you need 3 or 4, there's actually this new concept. A guy named Gabe Shapiro, who's a very famous lawyer in crypto, has this concept of the Borg, which is a rather than even trying to choose one entity, you say, hey, let's combine a bunch of different entities in a creative way where the different entities have different uses. And maybe that's the optimal structure for a project.
Okay, so let's do a case study here. Say we've got a DAO, and our DAO is to be like a Uniswap, for example. We come to you and we say, right, Adam, the Frilla Miller, we need to get our DAO registered somewhere. What would the process be like? How long would it take? I know every situation would be different, but let's say for like a pretty much bog standard DAO, how long would it take, and how much would it cost to get your DAO registered in the Marshall Islands, and how long would it take?
Sure. So first of all, one of the first questions we would usually ask someone is whether or not they have a lawyer, because if you can afford it, it's good to have a lawyer and a good crypto lawyer.
Let's say the answer is no. We're just tech guys, and we were planning on doing loads of disruptive stuff.
Yeah.
But no lawyers. All we've got is ideas.
Sure. So then we do our best without providing legal advice to help make sure the Marshall Islands is a good fit. And then assuming it is, they would sign up. And let me skip to the end of the process, which is once all of the organization's documents are prepared and signed and we submit them to the government, it's about 30 days before you get your charter, which is when your business is kind of live and you can start conducting business as the DAO LLC. So what can cause delays is what happens in preparing those documents, which is all up to the client, right? It's all up to the person creating the DAO. For example, if you go to our template library and you pick one of the templates and it's a perfect fit and you just fill it out and you sign it and you send it back to us, literally in an hour, we could have your documents submitted by the next day. And now in 30 days, you're going to have your DAO LLC. On the other hand, if you want to really review it extremely thoroughly, customize it, send it. Let's say your DAO already has 100 members and you want to send it to 100 people and say, send me your feedback. Well, now you might be looking at a several weeks review process before the operating agreement, which is the template document I'm talking about, is actually ready. So, and there's an easy way to kind of get the best of both worlds, which is keep it simple to get your documents submitted and then start working on the next version, because these documents can be updated anytime. And so if you don't mind, for example, let's say they say, okay, Cryptosi, you're going to be the one member on a one member, one vote operating agreement. We're not even going to put our token in the agreement yet. We're not even going to talk about on-chain stuff. This is just going to look like a traditional LLC with one member. Get everything submitted, right? Now you don't have to go back to the community for feedback in any way. Get the documents submitted. Okay, now go back to the community and say, now let's work on our operating agreement that we're going to replace the one that just has Cryptosi on it with as soon as we have our charter. And now you start. And so now you kind of get the best of both worlds. So it's 30 days. But again, there's that initial period of like, maybe there's, some back and forth internally in the DAO before you're actually ready to submit.
And what sort of costs would we be liable for?
Sure. So the cost, we have what we call needs-based pricing, which means that the smaller the DAO in its treasury, the lower the price. So the lowest possible price is $3,000 registration fee, and then $1,500 per year in an annual fee, just each January, not at first. The highest possible price is $9,500 registration fee and $5,000 a year. And again, that just depends on basically the size of the DAO's treasury. So for early stage startups that don't have any money, it's going to be the lowest price.
Are DAOs, are they taxable entities within the Marshall Islands? Is there a tax element to what happens when you're registered?
It's a good question. So one of the reasons why it's really important to register a DAO as a legal entity is that if you don't, you almost certainly will be taxed by the government, the IRS or whatever institution, is local to the DAO, or the people in the DAO. And actually, that's the crazy thing. If you don't have a legal entity, the DAO doesn't exist according to the law. In a sense, and from a tax perspective, the people are responsible for paying taxes on their share of the DAO's earnings. So that's one of the reasons you want to create a legal entity. If you create a non-profit DAO LLC in the Marshall Islands, there are no taxes on the entity and no taxes on the people. It is a purely no tax environment, just like a Cayman Foundation.
And what if it is a for-profit DAO entity? What if it's like a venture DAO? Then What would the taxation be like?
So a for-profit DAO LLC is subject to a 3% gross revenue tax, which means it's basically your sales get taxed at 3%. That does not apply to capital gains or dividends. And so actually for a venture DAO, it can still be a good fit because that 3% tax does not apply as long as you're making money off of capital gains and dividends. But because it's an LLC, you also have a pass-through tax liability. And so just like an LLC, any LLC in the United States, the individual members actually do also have a pass-through tax where they will be responsible for taxes on their share of the LLC's earnings. And so if the LLC were to make a lot of money on a capital gain, for example, that would be passed through to the members who would have to pay taxes on those capital gains in their home jurisdiction, in most jurisdictions, but not all.
Okay. But that would be a problem for me to handle in the UK, or for the person to handle in the UK and mitigate it effectively however they want to do.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. The members, if they sign up to a DAO, can the members simply be wallet addresses, or do the members have to KYC, saying we've registered in the Marshall Islands?
They can be just wallet addresses. So that's one of the beautiful things about the DAO LLC in the Marshall Islands is your members can be completely anonymous. They can just hold a token, and that's how you track your members. Is that token contract has a list of the members and how much of the token they hold.
Yeah, that is pretty powerful. That is pretty powerful stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I want to change tone slightly. So you've been in crypto quite a while, and luckily you didn't find the dark web as a child, because that would have probably been quite awkward. It might have scarred you a little bit, but you've been in crypto quite a while. So I guess you'll understand the tone shift, and you would have come across both camps. There are the old school camp where they will say code is law, and they don't want to have to kowtow to any government entity, and taxation is theft, and all of this other pretty extremist viewpoints. How do you let's say not quite mitigate? How do you counter argue that when you're trying to, or if you do try, when you're trying to explain to people that possibly now is the time for these traditionally non-government interfacing software protocols to start to interface with the government? How do you have that conversation? Where does it start? And what points are your main points for people effectively joining the legacy side of things?
Yeah. So first of all, I would tell anyone that code is not law. While you can use code to do some things that used to be possible only by using the law, right? And that is very powerful, right? Like we could do an escrow on chain or a trade on chain that until crypto came around, the only way to do a trade like that was with a written contract, right? Which is, I think, what people kind of mean when they say is law. They're saying it's like, is the contract kind of. Mm-hmm. And so that's extremely powerful. Still, even if you do that trade or that escrow through a smart contract, you are subject to the laws and regulations of the jurisdictions where you live, where perhaps you were when you signed that contract or did that deal. And actually, one of the powerful things about a DAO LLC, and you can also try to achieve similar things with other legal entities, is that you can connect your code to the law in a very clear-cut way. So for example, for any LLC, including a DAO LLC, the governing legal document of your organization is called an operating agreement. It's very similar to bylaws for a traditional corporation that people may be more familiar with. In this operating agreement, in the Marshall Islands DAO LLC, you will say something like the members, right? In a traditional LLC, you would say the members are the people listed on Exhibit A of this PDF, right? In a Marshall Islands DAO LLC, you're saying the members are the people who hold the token managed by the smart contract on this blockchain at this address. And so what you've done now is you've made it so that that smart contract is enforceable by law as the record of the members. And so now you could say you actually have made it so that that code is law, right? Similarly, you could say, right, in a traditional operating agreement, you might say that there are managing members and they will collect the votes of the members and they have to give people 5 days to submit their votes. And this is the quorum, et cetera. And they'll collect those votes by email or on paper or whatever in a meeting. In a DAO LLC, you're more likely to say that there is an algorithm located in a smart contract on this blockchain at this address that receives proposals from members, that counts the votes, that manages a quorum and a voting period, and automatically executes, right, transactions. And so again, now what you've done is you've made it so that actually in that scenario, you could say that that code is law because you've taken the law connected it through an operating agreement, which is the legal governing document of the organization, to an actual smart contract. And so I think that's really powerful. But yeah, I think it's important for people to note that, I mean, even to say that contract is law would be inaccurate to some degree, right? You can write a contract that's not legal. And so even contracts are not law. And so of course, smart contracts also are not law, but it's part of the law, and you can incorporate it into the way that you leverage the law or build on the platform that is the law.
How does this scenario work with multi-sig wallets? Can a multi-sig wallet be a member? And is that member just seen as the multi-sig wallet, regardless of the fact that maybe 5 or 10 people could have access? And then I guess, can a DAO be a member of another DAO? Because one DAO can hold tokens of another DAO, right? So
yeah, it's a really good question. So I think the way that these operating agreements work and the way these legal entities work still differentiates between what is a legal person and what is not. And for example, another legal entity, so let's say another DAO has a legal entity, that DAO can be a member of this legal entity, right? Just like a company can own shares in another company. Similarly, if a group of 5 people managing a multi-sig acts collectively to purchase a token that makes them a member of another DAO, the law would probably consider that group of multi-sig signers to be a general partnership, which is a default legal entity treatment. And they would say that general partnership is a member of the DAO. So I think the answer pretty much is yes. It's just you have to consider it again, what are the legal implications of a group of 5 people with or without a legal entity becoming a member or owner of another company? And there's a whole framework around that. And so you're putting yourself into that framework, and probably how you want to manage that ideally is if that's a core feature of the DAO, like if you're planning on having other DAOs or multi-sigs that are members or voters in your DAO, you might want to write about that a little bit in your operating agreement so that you're not just taking the default legal treatment, but you're maybe just writing a little bit about what does this really mean? How is it intended to be used? Is there anything that is not allowed? And so the other thing just I want to mention is that you can also use a multi-sig as if it were like a token and say, for example, that the multi-sig signers on the multi-sig located on this blockchain at this address are the members of the DAO. And by becoming a signer of a multi-sig, you become a member of the DAO. By leaving the multi-sig, you dissociate as a member. And so that's another way we do see a lot of our clients are actually using a multi-sig rather than a token to track DAO membership and do their DAO voting.
In that case, you end up with a smaller, more nimble DAO. You can make decisions quicker, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, it's interesting that effectively what you've done is you've not really reinvented the wheel. You've just found a way to interface the two worlds effectively.
Yes. I think that's right. And, this was something I talked about when I was on Balaji's podcast, in his vision for the future. And he's, in case anyone in the audience doesn't know, he wrote a book called The Network State. He's a really famous crypto technologist and an investor. And his vision for the future is a whole new legal substrate with these network states, where actually we can eventually get away from everything having to be based on the foundation of existing nations, which is the way things work today, and kind of gain sovereignty as separate network states that are not subject to any nation's laws and regulations. But things like what we're doing in the Marshall Islands are a stepping stone. Maybe it's halfway there, where, to your point, for now, we're kind of not reinventing the wheel, but adding something to the wheel or changing the way the wheel works. And eventually we're going to really reinvent the wheel in a good way.
I wanted to do a second part of our case study, whereby I'm from a small country in the Caribbean called Guyana. It's under 1 million people. And I go there and I say to them, well, look, currently cryptocurrency is not actually legal there. But I say to them, I want to have something like the Marshall Islands DAO, like a framework so that if there are people within the country that decide that they want to start up a DAO between themselves, it may be a street or a church or anything like that, they can do that. How would I go about the process of getting that legislation, I guess, through Parliament? What would you say would be the first steps to start something like that if you wanted to improve the legislation in your own home nation?
Yeah. So first of all, let me just ask you a quick question, which is it illegal? Like there are laws against crypto, or is it just illegal in the sense that there's no laws for or against it?
I'm not actually certain, but as far as I understand it, there's not quite laws specifically against it, but maybe there are laws that say you have to do things this way and anything else you do is not legal. So I don't know laws. I can't imagine that they've made laws specifically to say you can't use Bitcoin, you can't use blah, blah, blah. But I think the way that their laws were structured, it means that if you do, you kind of automatically fall into that. No, or as cryptocurrency.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. And I know that that's also a tradition or a culture thing. Some countries, like the United States, I think, unless something's illegal, you can pretty much do it, right? As long as you're not hurting someone. But I know that in other countries, it's more like you're describing, unless it's made legal, you can't do it.
Yeah.
And that's the way that the laws are applied.
Is it still to set up a DAO framework without having the cryptocurrency laws in place? Could it be just?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Yeah, I think it is. Okay, well, let me also introduce the concept of, I think there are two types of DAOs. And this also touches on something you mentioned earlier, like if we wanted to manage Tornado Cash, for example. So I think there are evolutionary DAOs and there are revolutionary DAOs. The evolutionary DAOs are the ones like the ones that we're supporting, where they're saying, hey, we're just trying to build on top of the existing system. We want to fit into existing legal frameworks. We want to fit into the existing economy, pay our taxes like everyone else. Just let us do what we're trying to do, right? And then you've got the revolutionary DAOs. And part of what DAOs make possible in the revolutionary sense is they are censorship resistant ways of organizing people and resources. And what I mean by that is kind of like DAOs are to traditional organizations, like crypto is to traditional money, in the sense that the government can stop you from using traditional money, but they cannot stop you from using Bitcoin. They can try, right? But like you could, even in a country that doesn't allow it, you could do it, right?
Yeah.
You just use a real crypto wallet and find someone on the street who will sell you some Bitcoin, or do it with me right now, right over the podcast. And so DAOs are similar. It's a way for people to organize in a way that the government physically cannot stop you, because you're doing it on a crypto wallet. You're airdropped a token, or you buy a token that represents a governance right in a DAO, or you get, even don't call it a token if you don't want to, right? I mean, a lot of DAOs use reputation to represent voting rights or ownership of the DAO. And they may actually do it with an ERC20 smart contract, probably most of the time, because that's the easiest way to do it. But you don't have to. You could just have a smart contract that's literally just a list of members and how much voting rights they have. And now you've removed the need to have a token, but you still have a DAO. So in that sense, I think, first of all, there is something powerful about how DAOs allow people to create organizations, even if the government doesn't want you to. But also, to your point, yes, I think you can also have DAOs without tokens that people generally consider to be cryptocurrencies, right? You can create your own native token, or you simply don't use a token. Maybe the harder part is just if that DAO wants to hold money on chain, that's something you need to do pretty much through tokens. And again, it may be a more censorship resistant way for an organized group of people to hold money than using something that's tied to the traditional legal system, but that might still be considered illegal.
I guess then if we really get nuanced, we can argue what is the money. Because I suppose if you're holding other assets or you're holding other tokens, then you're not really holding money, providing you're not holding maybe USDC or DAI or any of the actual stable coins which are pegged to the value of money. Then I guess you're not actually holding money. So you can have an organization which doesn't have tokens and doesn't hold money. And then it's just a question of, should these people be allowed to communicate and work
right,
and conspire on the same thing, I suppose?
Right. yet. Right. And there are countries where you're not allowed to, right? I think places like China, maybe Russia, you are not allowed to just start a company. Right. A group of people cannot just start engaging in a collaborative venture together. You have to register that with the government and get their approval. And if the government doesn't want 5 people collaborating together on something, they're not allowed to do it. And so maybe DAO technology is a way of helping people in that environment still be able to organize. Cause to your point, right? This allows a group of people to collaborate over making shared decisions.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Okay. So in that scenario, I'm thinking you have, I don't know how you do it with Marshall Islands, but I'm assuming you'd have like a group of lawyers that you would say, you would refer people to. So you might say, okay, well, let's speak to this lawyer, let's speak to that lawyer. And they will be very familiar with both cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, and the laws in the local area. You'd have a group of those people. Between those people, you'd draft together something that looks like it could pass legislation, and then give it to the politicians and say, right, you lot sort it out between yourselves, sign it, and let's get this one in the book.
I mean, I would say, practically speaking, it might be better to reach out to the politicians first. Frankly, this idea for the Marshall Islands DAO LLC, we really came up with it collaboratively with the senator there. I say in my story, we reached out to him. That's true. But this was a senator, actually, that we had spoken with about other ideas. We had always talked to him, hey, what's a cool thing the Marshall Islands could do with its sovereignty to help drive innovation in technology? Yeah. And this was just the latest idea. And so even though he's not allowed to be part of MyDAO, the company, and he's still a senator, now a minister in the country, and so he simply can't be a part of our private effort, he's practically part of the team, right? And has been from the beginning. And I think that's just more likely to succeed as a model if you can find a government official or a group of them, or people that have worked closely with the government before. We also have a co-founder that was brought in by the now minister to partner with us from the private sector. So if you could find, a private sector person and a senator, or I'm not sure what you call the government officials, but to collaborate with you from the beginning. And yes, you do all the work, right? Most of the work. That's not why you're bringing them in to do the hard work, but like to be part of the endeavor from the beginning and provide their insight, experience, connections, etc. That may be a better model.
Was there any worry about, like in the United States, you've got the Republicans and the Democrats, and if one group is in power, then the other group will just say no to whatever this one says. Was there any worries about things like that when you were setting up the Marshall Islands DAO? Was there a worry that perhaps by the time you finished this legislation, maybe your guys' team were no longer in power and the other guys were like, well, we're going to say no purely because those guys said yes? Was that a worry during the process?
Yeah. I mean, I think just overall political risk, right? It could be the two different parties. It could be the government, like the bureaucracy versus the political branch. It could be that the people, the politicians want to do it, but the people that elected them don't and force them not to. So luckily, our most recent law, and I think our most recent 2 laws, have passed almost unanimously because we've been able to generate such a strong coalition in favor of doing this. And really, there's good reason for this, right? The Marshall Islands is physically sinking into the ocean. Or actually, a better way of putting it is the ocean is, they think, rising. And within 20 or 30 years, the Marshall Islands could literally be underwater. And the only way to fix that is with something like $5 to $10 billion worth of work on land reclamation, seawall building, etc. And there is no prospective solution aside from them finding a way to make money. All the biggest environmental agencies, the United States, Europe, all these like big organizations might be able to contribute $100 or $200 million over the next 20 or 30 years. No one's come close to being able to commit the money that they literally need to save their country. And so they are looking for revenue generation opportunities. And so whether it's DAOs, whether it's something else, countries like the Marshall Islands, and they're not alone, they have to find ways to innovate and find ways to generate revenue literally to survive. And so I think that's why the whole government is supportive of doing something like this.
Yeah. So effectively, they are very, very much risk on right now. They really have to Okay. It's
Yeah, no,
interesting.
I will say that they also have to manage risk, right? Maybe that's a given, but if we saw what the US Treasury did, or the Fed, to Russia, and I know it's a very different scenario, but the Fed can literally turn off people's dollars, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the US government decides that what we're doing in the Marshall Islands is too risky, they have an on-off switch to the Marshall Islands, which is insane, right? It's not right. It's insane. But they do. And so we still have to be careful. We actually have a consulting firm in DC that takes these ideas to the government and it's a US government and just shops it around, make sure we're not doing anything that's totally outlandish, right? We still follow all the international bodies, like FATF is a good example. The Financial Action Task Force, that is a non-governmental organization that effectively regulates everyone in the world in terms of what they do with money and finance. And we do everything we can. We do follow all their rules and recommendations. So you still have to do all that stuff. But certainly a lot of countries are much more afraid than the Marshall Islands. So to your point, yes, relatively, it's a country that's willing to be risk on.
It's I guess that's the sort of behavior that makes the old school Bitcoiners kind of be like, oh, we're going to fight this because we don't want to be ruled by these tyrants and these unelected bodies, et cetera, et cetera. But when reality actually hits, the bottom line is these guys can turn off everybody's lights and nobody wants that. So
yeah. and so do both. I mean, I think everyone should be thinking about both. MyDAO, the company, is not going to do subversive things, but the fact is that, again, everything we're building in the DAO industry, right? Like the people that are building technology, yes, you need the legal, you need the tech, you need the tax, you need all these things put together. But all of us collectively are still contributing to technology that will make it possible to be subversive and do revolutionary things when the time comes.
Yeah. Okay. DAOs, generally, you've probably got quite a lot of experience with DAOs. You do host your own podcast. Actually, before I ask you that, Adam the Thriller Miller, where has the thriller come from? What has inspired that name? Because as far as crypto names go, I think you've got one of the better ones.
Thank you. This was my college hockey nickname. I played ice hockey in college. And there's a fun story of how this came about. So, everyone gets a nickname at some point during their freshman year. So this was mid-freshman year. We had a really bad game the night before, and I was going to be late for practice the next day. When you're going to be late, someone's got to write your name on the whiteboard and just say, it's like the late list, right? So there were a few names on the board. One of them was Miller, my last name. Someone just thought to cross out the M and write THR, so it would say Thriller. So anyways, eventually we're all at practice and we are all in the locker room. Our coach is just yelling at us. I mean, throwing stuff around the room, so angry, just yelling and yelling. And his eyes kind of look over to the whiteboard and he goes, "And who the fuck is Thriller?" And everyone just starts laughing because they all knew it was me, even though it wasn't totally obvious. And so he starts laughing and it was just this nice, convivial moment. And so that stuck. And that was my nickname in college. Now, after college, I didn't use that nickname until crypto. And luckily with crypto, now we all have nicknames again. And so I had the opportunity to bring it back.
Bring back the thriller. Okay.
Bring back the thriller. Exactly.
What is your favorite DAO? Which is the DAO that you like the most and why?
Okay, so I'm just going to mention Bankless DAO as an honorable mention. I love Bankless DAO, and there's a really interesting history. There's some really interesting drama the last few months. There's some really interesting kind of trying to rebuild and figure out what we're going to be. So check out Bankless DAO. A lot of people got their start there. But I'm going to make my official first choice favorite DAO, PurpleDAO. Purple is the primary DAO that supports the Farcaster ecosystem. So Farcaster being this, what is now really hot and fast growing Web3 social platform. It basically started out as a Twitter clone. Now it's so much more than Twitter. But it's really blowing up lately. One of the cool things about Purple, so Purple started around the time Farcaster started. It's not, the people who actually run Farcaster are not even members. It's technically totally independent. And it uses the Nouns DAO model. By leveraging something called Nouns Builder, which you can find at nouns.build. It's a way of launching DAOs really easily that work off the same kind of model that a DAO called Nouns used. And what that model is, and the way we've implemented it, is every day there is one auction for the next purple NFT. And whoever bids the most gets that to be the next member. And so as long as you always have at least two people, and ideally even dozens or hundreds or more people who want to join the PurpleDAO, that drives up the price of that auction so that every day you're raising money for the DAO and slowly growing your membership. And so it's a really interesting model, I think, because it's a way of growing slowly in terms of the number of people. It's a way of, as long as there's interest in joining, creating this market force that drives up the price of the auction and the token, so that you're always raising money. And so this is a nonprofit endeavor, right? Like we are not making money off of Purple. In fact, we're granting the money to developers, to people hosting meetups, to Farcaster itself, anything that helps support the Farcaster ecosystem. And so it's almost like, and other DAOs have done the same thing, but this is a really cool model for a nonprofit DAO with a market cap. Now, in the past, before crypto, nonprofits never had a market cap, right? The only way to give money to support a nonprofit was to donate your money. There was no way to like buy a 0.1% share in the nonprofit. Now there's a way to buy a 0.1% share in a nonprofit. You get governance rights, and it creates a sustainable revenue model, fundraising / revenue model for the DAO. That could go on forever. And if the DAO ever wanted to, it could sell more tokens to raise more money, right? So in our DAO's treasury, we have extra purple NFTs. And so again, it was never possible before for a nonprofit to say, you know what? Our market cap is $1 billion. Let's sell an extra 10% of our like equity effectively in the nonprofit, even though there's no dividends, no one has an expectation of profit, but let's sell an extra 10% and raise $100 million. Until now, that was something only for-profit corporations could do. Now nonprofit DAOs can do it too. And so this could revolutionize nonprofit funding all over the world in ways that I think, and not only that, but create wealth in ways that we could not even imagine 10 years ago. Right? Suddenly you can create wealth by starting a successful nonprofit. That's crazy, right? And the implication on the nonprofit world and just on the overall economy could be massive.
Yeah, that's crazy. How big is the PurpleDAO? How many members does it have, and what's the market cap currently?
So we're up to around 400 or 500 members. Each token tends to go for, I think, around 0.2 ETH. So right now that'd be maybe $800 ish. And so if I multiply 800, I'm going to just pull up my calculator here, times 500. So $400,000 market cap, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. That's, do you know what? I've heard of Farcaster, and I didn't know it was backed by a DAO. Well, yeah, even though they have not asked to be backed by the DAO was just from, and I really like nouns as well. I really like that model. With the Purple, do the NFTs continue to be minted, or is there a stop? Will it stop at 10,000? Will it stop a certain amount of years into the future?
So the DAO can change the issuance of new tokens through a vote. And so for now, it's just one a day indefinitely forever. But we could at any moment, we could increase the rate of production, change the minimum if we wanted to, stop the auctions from happening completely. So it does give the community. And by the way, some nouns DAOs have said, hey, let's have an auction every minute or every hour. Like we're not trying to necessarily be as exclusive, and we don't care as much about driving the value up. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different ways you could approach it.
The issue being, I guess, similar to with fiat money, that the more new passes or vote making NFTs you allow, the more you water down your own vote that you have. So it's kind of, I guess it would be finding that balance. But it's a very interesting model. It's a very interesting model. I'd not heard of PurpleDAO as yet. What chain is it on? Is it on Ethereum or?
We just migrated from Ethereum to Base.
Right. Okay. What was the reason behind that? Just because it's cheaper to vote?
Yeah. Effectively. Yeah. I mean, we went from like $20 to $30 to vote to 3 to 30 cents. And yeah. So I think a lot of the all of the nouns DAOs were on Ethereum, and they've been working on the migration technology for some time. And I think we're the second or third DAO that's moving to base, including the DAO that built Noun's builder, I think is moving now. So yeah, it's mainly the cost of voting. And if you think about it, like some of the stuff we want to fund, I mean, every DAO is different. Let's say we want to fund a meetup. I think there's one coming up in like Rome or something, and we want to fund it with like $1,000.
Yeah.
For that vote to pass would cost more than $1,000 to just in gas fees. And so now instead we can spend $20 on a $1,000 grant. And so it does open up a lot in terms of what we're able to do.
Yeah, that does make a lot more sense. And is the PurpleDAO, is that registered with MyDAO? Is that registered in the Marshall Islands? Are you registered anywhere, or is that?
We are in the process of registering in the Marshall Islands. Yep.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. Right. Cautious of time. And I know I did say it will be half an hour to 45 minutes. I'm at the 50-minute mark. I'm almost halfway through my questions. So I'm going to skip a big chunk of them. And, what do you see? I've got two more questions, right?
Sure.
What do you see as the biggest mistake that people make when they're either building their DAOs or when they're operating their DAOs? What do you think is the biggest mistake people make over and over again?
Yeah. I ask most of my podcast guests the same question. So I get a lot of good answers on this. I think most of the mistakes are people and social and political mistakes, not technology mistakes. Like let's say you're starting a normal company and you spend all your time thinking about what is our corporate structure going to be? How is our stock going to work? How are our options going to work? How are people going to buy in? Who are the investors going to be? And you spend zero time thinking about how are we actually going to do the work of the company day to day? What's our culture going to be? Who do I want involved? How do we decide who should be involved? Do we have values? What's the product roadmap going to be? Like all these things that you actually have to figure out if you're building something. Now, like again, all DAOs are different. I think one of the things that DAOs make possible is to actually know less upfront, because you don't have to trust the CEO with your money when you buy in, or with your life. If you go work as an employee, you get to help decide. You don't have to know as much upfront for the DAO to necessarily be successful. But still, if the people leading or starting the DAO only think about tokenomics and smart contracts and governance and do not think at all about how do we make sure everyone actually hears about the DAO, joins the DAO, is onboarded into the DAO, has a good experience with the DAO, then I think that's what a lot of people forget. Or they just assume, hey, our whole way of operating is that we're just democratic. Everyone will vote on everything and we'll figure out the rest later. Again, that's actually very powerful that that's possible for the first time in human history, but it's not usually sufficient. You really need to think about how does a DAO actually work day to day, moment to moment, not just how are we going to govern the DAO.
Adam, what are your thoughts on voter apathy? As you're saying about everybody voting on everything, one thing that I've noticed with DAOs is that it's often very difficult to even get people to vote. How do you think that could be improved? And do you think it's a big problem or not?
I don't think that a low voting turnout percentage on its own is necessarily a problem. I think actually a lot of times that can be okay. Let's say it's a really big, diverse group of people all over the world with different interests, it's different knowledge. And when there's a proposal, only the people who care about it the most know the most about it. Maybe they wrote it. Maybe it benefits them. Like if those are the people paying attention and voting most of the time, that's probably fine. I think what matters the most is that if and when something really important comes up, and especially if there's a possible like governance attack, like let's say someone's going to come in and they notice that 5% of the people vote most of the time, and they go and they buy 10% of the DAO's tokens, and they go in and write a proposal and put all their 10% behind it. Do the people have a way of activating the other 90% that's usually not participating and getting them to pay attention in the next 5 days or however long the voting period is to make sure that this attacker, right, is not able to succeed? I think that's really important. So that's, and then also just like, again, each DAO is different, right? It could be a charity, could be a for-profit, could be a trade association, could be a high school chess club, could be a government. Right. And in each of these cases also, maybe the DAO votes on every decision. Maybe it just votes on the budget every quarter, and maybe it elects a CEO. Most DAOs don't. I think increasingly we will see DAOs with CEOs, but they can elect or unelect the person anytime. And so that's still a big difference between a traditional corporation and a DAO with a CEO. And so just thinking about how does your DAO work? what are the types of decisions people are going to be making, and what is really the risk of having a small voter turnout, if any, and how do you mitigate that specific risk?
Okay. I'm sorry, I've got another question that's just come up.
Great, let's do it.
With the way DAOs are progressing, what do you see as the biggest upcoming technological, let's say, well, not only technological, possibly social as well, progressions that we will see coming out of DAOs? How do you think DAOs will change before this next boom is over?
It's a great question, and I think the technology is tied with the actual thing that will change for the people, because, and that's the other thing with DAOs, since you're running so much of the operations with technology, you kind of have to build the technology to enable the model. So take, for example, let's say you want your DAO to have teams, and these teams are given budgets once a quarter or once a year, and you elect who's in the team. But then once they're there, they get to make that decision as a team. You don't get to vote on what that team does. Okay, well, to make this possible on chain, you have to build the smart contracts that allow you to have teams and elect teams, and the teams to have budgets. So the two go together. And I do think that's where a lot of the innovations happening over the past year or two of the bear market was people saying, wait a second, just letting everyone vote on everything didn't always work very well, or maybe often didn't work well. We need a little more nuanced structure, either hierarchy or teams or committees, roles, even if it's individual people having roles. There's one protocol called HATS protocol. It's really oriented around like, okay, this NFT has a certain budget and certain rights or responsibilities. And then you can give that NFT to either a person, and then that's like putting on their hat, or you give it to a team, like a multi-sig. And now those 5 people have that role. And so I think this next phase of DAOs is going to be a little more thoughtfully designed in terms of either hierarchy or structure, one or the other.
Perfect. The theme seems to be, as we start to mix reality with our dreams. So we dreamed for these things to have this panarchy where everybody can vote. And now we're kind of realizing maybe that's not the right way now that we can actually do it. Next episode.
Well, can I just, I think it's awesome for everyone to be able to vote. It's awesome. Just what do we want them to be voting on? How often? And should there also be some people who can act without a vote? I think that's it, right? Just to be clear, like again, even take a traditional like American government, the city I live in California, right? We get to elect our city council once every, I think 2 years, maybe 4, I think 2 years. And if they suck, there's almost nothing we can do. And voting is expensive. It takes, right, California, it takes months and millions of dollars, maybe tens or hundreds of $1 million to host a vote, right? This isn't like Ethereum level gas fees. This is like another order of magnitude of expense for voting. If you can take that expense from like, it takes months and like millions of dollars, millions of people, everyone's got to go drive to the voting booth or drop off their ballot or whatever. And you take the fee of voting down to almost nothing and you implement a cryptographic voting system. Well, now maybe you say, hey, if you really want to, you can kick out your city council member at any time and elect a new one. Right. Mm-hmm. And before, it literally was cost prohibitive to do that. There's no way to do it. Now it's possible. So will we choose to implement that? Maybe. And if we do, that is really, really powerful. And that's such a small change. So I think that there is so much power just in that, like, now everyone can vote and we can do it as often as we want. And it's just a matter of deciding how often is the right amount.
Yeah. How often can we keep up with it? What happens to me often is that I'm in 4 or 5 DAOs. So to keep up with what's happening in all of the DAOs becomes almost a job within itself. So that's, I guess, where the problem would be. In my next episode, I get to have anybody from the crypto world that you've ever met before. Who is the person that you would say would be the best person to have on DAO Watch Fireside next?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Lisa Walken.
Okay.
She is.
How do you spell that?
Lisa, and she's doxxed, so I don't think she'll mind me putting this on the air. LisaWocken. And she has a website. It's just lisawalken.com. I think she's also on Twitter. I think it's just Lisa Walken. So she's about to publish a report the most groundbreaking, thorough report on token engineering. But she has previously participated in writing reports on DAO leadership. And she comes from an academic background. She's a PhD in organizational leadership. And I think that actually, and there's a group of a number of folks like her doing this type of work. It's sorely needed, is to kind of like we're talking about, don't throw out all the old stuff that organizations used to do and just do like full democratic voting on everything. Find the middle ground. Also, don't ignore decades of organizational study in universities, also in corporations with like famous leaders and proven leaders. We've got to take all those lessons that have been learned in the past and all those methods of study and apply them to what we're doing now and use the best of both worlds. I think Lisa is one of the best people at doing that, and probably she'd be willing to come on to talk about the token engineering study since it's being launched soon.
Awesome. Well, I'm not gonna make you sort that out. I'm gonna make you hook it up for me, as we say. I think I'll try and chase her down on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever I can find her. Now I've got a name, I should be able to find her. Is there anything else you'd like to say, or where can people go to find out more about you? This is your chance to plug the podcast and your other work.
Awesome. So you can find the Just DAO It podcast on any podcast platform. We're also Just DAO It on Twitter or Just DAO It Pod. My favorite place for you to find me would be Farcaster, where I'm the Thriller, or Just DAO It. You can find MyDAO there also. You can also find MyDAO at MyDAO.org, MIDAO.org, and that links to all of our other social profiles, our Discord server. So those would be probably my favorite places to send you. If you really are still on Twitter, I get it. And I'm 0xThriller on Twitter because the Thriller was already taken.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up? As we've just crossed the 1 hour mark. We've just gone overboard. Is there anything else you'd want to say before we wrap up?
I guess I'll just briefly share my vision for the future of DAOs. You know, I think it's really common for people to think when a new technology comes out, like look at Uber. People said, okay, maybe if Uber is really successful in 10 years, half of all the taxis of the world will be Ubers instead. But they missed the point. Just like they said, maybe in 10 years, Amazon will sell half of all the books of the world, if they're lucky. They missed the point, right? And the same thing is going to be true with DAOs. It's not like in 10 years, half of the companies of the world are going to be DAOs. No, there's still going to be lots of companies, but there are going to be 10 times as many DAOs as there are structured organizations of any kind today in 10 years. Just like you're using Uber in places in your life where no one used to use taxis before. No one considered there are all kinds of people don't even have a car anymore that would have had a car before. So what does that mean for organizations? If you think about now that there's this new substrate that makes it as easy to launch an organization as it is to launch a website, and you can scale an organization at the speed of the cloud, what does that mean for how we're going to organize ourselves and our resources on Earth and beyond in 5 to 10 years from now? And that's what's going to be really fun and really interesting.
Brilliant. Adam, the Thriller Miller, thank you so much for coming on and sharing so much. I'm going to have you back because I've got still another 6 questions that I didn't even get around to. You're a wealth of knowledge. You're a credit to our industry. It's been great to have you on. So thank you so much. Have you got an episode with Lisa Wacken on your Just DAO It? Has she been on?
A couple. One was about a year or more ago, and one was just a couple months ago. And I definitely recommend. They're 2 of my favorite episodes. Okay. I'll look out for those and I'll see if I can find them. I'll put the link to those below in the description. Adam, awesome. Thank you so much, sir. Hopefully we'll hear from you soon. Thank you. Thank you. It's been great being on the show, Crypto C. Thank you.